We'll wait a couple more minutes. I know Councilman Tinajero's in the building. So, well, good evening, everybody. I want to welcome you to the Public Safety, Code Enforcement, and Neighborhood Empowerment special meeting. We do have all three members here now. We first will begin with a call to order. So if the recording secretary would like to call the names. All present, yes.
Present.
Thank you. Thank you. Next, we're going to go straight to public comments, just so we can hear public comments now, or it may be more beneficial to have the members of the public go, if okay, first hear the staff presentation, and then the public comment. That way, there's a better sense of what to comment on. So if that is okay with the public, and I see a lot of nodding, we will do that and go then to the first item, which is our only item for today because it's so important for us to get this right. It's a proposed ordinance regarding adult use, distribution, cultivation, manufacturing, and testing of cannabis, and we have Acting Executive Director Candida Neal and other staff members presenting.
Good afternoon, Chair and Council members. It is a pleasure to be here this afternoon to present the draft ordinance for adult use and commercial cannabis. What you have here before today is the draft ordinance, and we do have about a 15-minute presentation to cover some of the elements that are going into this draft ordinance. And we have a team comprised of different departments. We have the City Attorney's Office here, the Planning and Building Department, Finance, Police Department, that we have been working collaboratively to put this draft ordinance together. What the presentation basically will cover is very high-level highlights of the ordinance. It will also cover the projected revenue depending on the number of licenses or the structure that is established and recommended by this committee and staff, the enforcement efforts, and also the timeline that we will take to take this item before the full City Council. This is very specific to adult use and all additional commercial cannabis that is tied to this. So this is production, manufacturing, indoor cultivation. It is not tied to or directly specific for Measure BB. As it relates to Measure BB will stay intact as it relates to the regulations and the number of collectives that we will allow to operate under the voter initiative. Again, the goal today is basically to make the presentation to this council committee and seek recommendations to move forward again now to the full City Council. And with that, I'll turn it over to our first representative that will be presenting, which is Tamara.
Good evening, Chair, Council members, City Manager, Chief, staff, and members of the community. What we have before you today is just a brief snippet of both medical marijuana law and adult use as it progressed through the legislative process. As you all know, in November 2014, we had an overwhelming approval of Measure BB to allow for 20 permitted medical marijuana collectives and cooperatives to operate in the city. Our collectives have been up and running, and in November 2016, the California voters, including residents of the city of Santa Ana, approved again overwhelmingly Prop 64, which was the Adult Use Marijuana Taxation Act to allow for the adult use of cannabis. Sometime around June 2017, there was a Senate bill that passed, Senate Bill 94, that created MRSA, which is the Medicinal and Adult Use Cannabis Regulation Safety Act. And what that essentially did, for those of you who do not know, is it merged both the medical cannabis and adult cannabis regulations to all be under one Bureau of Cannabis. In January 2018, the state will start issuing licenses, specifically January 2nd, to allow for permitted uses unless local jurisdictions such as cities and counties adopt ordinances. And so Santa Ana Measure BB, which you all may or may not know, continues to address only medical cannabis retail sales. and taxation and does not address adult use or any expanded uses. So Prop 64 was approved by a majority at both the state level and here in our council wards, as you can see by the numbers there. What that did is essentially the day after the ballot measure was passed, it made recreational use of cannabis legal and allowed for individuals over the age of 21 to keep up to 6 mature plants in their home for personal use. As I stated earlier, we believe January 2nd is what Ms. Ajax, the director of the Bureau, is saying would be the date that the state will start issuing licenses. And as such, local jurisdictions have until January 1, 2008 to adopt ordinances that allow or specifically ban or prohibit various types of cannabis activity. What's important and what's key is that if the city of Santa Ana takes no action, if we simply just allow our Measure BB ordinance to continue, we will have no local input and no local control over cannabis recreational uses. So what are the options? Essentially, the city of Santa Ana has 3 options under Prop 64. We can maintain the status quo and continue to allow and regulate only medical marijuana retail. Excuse me, thank you. Retail activity. We can allow and regulate additional activities, which would include adult use and other expanded commercial activities, or we could do nothing. If we do nothing, like I stated earlier, the city could lose local control over land use decisions if the state issues a license, and we will have no relevant ordinance in place to make that activity illegal. And now I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Neal.
Good afternoon. The next slide. We want to talk a little bit about our outreach program. The city went out and met with neighborhood groups, specifically ComLink, neighborhood associations, as well as we also looked at industry groups. So who was the Chamber of Commerce as well as the Santa Ana Cannabis Association. We've met with you before on this topic as well. Most of our outreach activities were pre-draft ordinance, and in those meetings we focused on specifically on the idea that should we do this, and we explained to them what Tamara just explained to you about how if we ban it, we lose the ability to enforce it. And so the only way that we can really regulate it is through adopting an ordinance that would allow us to license it. Next slide, please. What did we hear? So when we presented it in this manner, of course, the cannabis community was very enthusiastic about thinking about expanding the uses, but the community was a bit apprehensive initially. But they did understand, and they were very, very committed to keeping regulation local, to maintain local control, and to keeping the cannabis uses in the industrial districts, as we do now. Right now, our ordinance requires them to locate in M1 and M2, and that was important to them as well. And it was also very important that we be able to continue local code enforcement issues, because we do anticipate, based on our experience with medicinal cannabis uses, when it became legalized, we had a large influx of illegal uses. So we do anticipate with the legalization of adult use that we will have another influx of illegal uses as well as legal ones. So next slide, please. Based on the community feedback, we have drafted an ordinance, and the ordinance basically allows medicinal and adult use cannabis uses. It restricts them to the existing M1 and N2 industrial zones, and it sets up distance criteria. 500 feet and the one from each other, and 1,000 feet. And that's only for retail uses. I should be specific on that. And then 1,000 from schools, parks, and what we call sensitive uses, recreational areas. In addition, we made a real commitment to having cannabis uses pay their fair share. And this would be done so that they would be taxed or enter into, if a tax was not available to us, until a tax is available to us, they would enter into an agreement between the city and the individual user. Each user would have to establish a contract with the city that would say they would behave in certain ways and that they would agree to pay their appropriate in lieu fees. So they would be responsible for making those payments until such time as we had the ability to tax the uses. Next slide, please. This last slide talks about, well, it's not the last slide, but talks about the draft, about the additional licenses. There's a difference between use and license. And as you can see from the slide, and it may be difficult for some of you to see, we're setting limits on the number of uses that we can. Medicinal cannabis will not change. It will remain at up to 20. Adult use will be 23 retail establishments as well. Indoor cultivation, we're also establishing a limit of 20, with manufacturing processing being 20. Distribution will be limited to 5, and there will be no limit on testing. Now, the idea of establishing these limits and these numbers, it may seem like we would have a lot of businesses, a lot of cannabis businesses. What does that add up to? 88 uses? We don't expect, we're basing these number limits on certain assumptions. And the first one is that medicinal uses will probably either expand to include adult use. So one business would have multiple licenses. And when we spoke to representatives from the cannabis industry, they indicated that it was important for them, if they were having a retail establishment, to also be able to do some cultivation and some manufacturing. So one business itself may carry 4, even 5 licenses if they were going to include the medical cannabis as well. Testing, we did not put a limit on, and that you may have a question on why we would do that, because most of the testing facilities don't just test cannabis. They test food products, drugs. They do a range of testing, and so, but they would have to have a separate license for testing cannabis. Next slide, please. All cannabis businesses would require permits. It's the structure that we're going to be using in terms of for regulation of these uses is very similar to what we have now with Measure BB. They would be required to submit an application. The application then, after they submitted the application, it was complete, it would be reviewed, and if it was approved, they would be issued what is called a regulatory safety permit, or RSP, very similar to our current system with Measure BB. Although it says it would be reviewed by the police department, that means a live scan. Ultimately, it would be issued either from the city manager's office or through our agency, the Planning and Building Agency. They would be, but because we're creating a limit, we have to evaluate who gets the license, and that would be done on a merit system. So we would be assigning points that would help us identify which applicants would be qualified and quality operators, and it is our intention to make this system as transparent as possible. And I'm going to repeat this. We talked about the in lieu tax agreement before, but all for this first session, because we do not have a tax in place, all businesses would be subject to would be required to enter into an in lieu tax agreement with the city.
Good evening, Chair, council members, members of the public. What we'd like to show you here in this slide.
Another page that is not up here, or is the order? Oh,
Okay. So what we're trying to show to all of you here in this slide are our revenue estimates. Now, there are many factors that go into these estimates. We received information from our consultants. We have a certain degree of local knowledge, and also we have information from our ongoing audits. So pulling all this information together, these are our best estimates. And the numbers you see here within the table are the low-end revenue estimates. And you'll see another column which shows the funding for enforcement efforts and how they're being funded out of the different variety of additional uses. At the top, I want to draw your attention to the fact that we believe that the current medicinal use, which is projected for $3.5 million if we make no changes, and of course, 50% of that would go to enforcement at $1.75 million. If we pass this ordinance and we authorize additional uses, so this would be adult use, retail sales, indoor cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, testing laboratories. So in the center column that says low-end revenues, you can see how these figures extend out. You'll notice there's an asterisk next to adult use retail that we're showing here in this table at 2,610,000, and that is that we arrive at that figure by taking the 3.5 million, pardon me, and calculating that an additional 75% of that figure will be the minimum result of adopting the ordinance, authorizing adult use, authorizing these additional uses. However, we're aware that that represents a low-end revenue figure, so it's possible, given all the variety of factors, that it could be, instead of 75%, it could be as great as 150%. And at 150%, we see, $5.25 million. And so the range then goes from 9.1 million to 20.2 million. The indoor cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, testing laboratories, again, these are the low-end revenue figures. And they scale up from there based on a variety of factors that are applicable to each one. But that is the complete range that we project, 9.1 million to 20.2 million. And that concludes our revenue estimate.
For the record, because I think some of us missed it, can you give us your name and department?
Oh, yes, of course. Thank you. My name is Willard Holt, and I'm the Treasury and Customer Services Manager.
Great, thank you. And even from the committee, we'll do questions after the presentation as well.
The next part is enforcement. Again, my name is Alvaro Nunez. I'm the Code Enforcement Manager. As part of our enforcement efforts, we'll continue to have the Cannabis Enforcement Task Force, and that would include representatives from the City Attorney's Office, of course, the Police Department, Finance, and, of course, Code Enforcement. Just a little bit of an update. Since Measure BB passed, I think we have accounted for 84% of closure of illegal dispensaries. We currently have 19 identified dispensaries. And as we went to City Council on September 5, we're expanding our enforcement efforts, not just into the customary search warrants, inspection warrants, but also receiverships. And again, as far as the administration efforts and enforcement, we expect at least 50% of the revenues to go towards that.
No, just on the police department enforcement, and I'll echo what Alan said. We've been very, very busy responding to complaints, concerns, tips from concerned citizens and business owners in the city. Our collaborative efforts with the city attorney's office and the task force have continued, and we will definitely be able to do a lot more as well with the additional revenue that this ordinance would provide for. When we're looking at 50% of the new revenue, that would be used for enforcement efforts on our end, but also for the city attorney and code enforcement. So that would only bolster our efforts as well to be able to respond to those specific complaints. And our goal is to have 0 illegal dispensaries, and I trust we'll get there at some point.
Can you also give us your name?
Commander
again?
Jason Vermontes, and I'm with the Special Investigations Division for the Police
Excellent.
Department.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And next here we have the implementation timeline. Given the deadline that we have of January 2018, staff is recommending, along with the recommendations of this council committee, to bring this item before the City Council for their consideration on October 17th, followed by a second reading of the ordinance on November 7th. We will also be taking to the City Council the merit system and the evaluation process that we are recommending, as well as the in lieu fee agreement template that will be utilized for any additional uses as far as other collectives or dispensaries that wish to open. Between November 8th all the way through the end of the calendar year, we anticipate to review and finalize the application process and start accepting applications with the intent, again, of having this go through and operational by January 2nd, 2018.
Can I ask a quick question? I know we're going to ask other questions, but
Sure.
One of the questions that I wanted to ask, and maybe we can get to it a little later, is a union labor piece associated with some of these potential businesses coming into our city.
Let's do public comment, and then we'll take it back to the council here for questions, and then by staff having the opportunity of hearing your comments or questions, then combined with the council member questions, they can hopefully respond to something as well. Just to give everybody a sense of expectations for this meeting, if it does appear that the draft ordinance is in good shape and doesn't require too much work based off of council comments and questions and public comments and questions, if it looks like it's generally in good shape, it would go directly to the council meeting on October 17th. If for some reason there are a lot of questions, a lot of issues, and there's value to maybe having another special meeting in advance, I know in speaking with staff, we thought that might be something we ought to do, because this ordinance overall is significant enough to the city, the community, and the industry that I want us to have a pretty good sense of where we're at in as clean an ordinance as possible on October 17th. So with that, we will just begin with comments, and we do have somebody that is going to keep time. And I think typically, have we been doing 2 minutes or 3 minutes in our committee? So 3 minutes, everybody has 3 minutes, and the recording secretary will alert you once you're getting close to your time. Let's begin with Peter Katz.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and committee and members here. I just want to make some brief comments, but as a note of personal privilege in light of what happened last night in Las Vegas about a year and a half ago after the Pulse nightclub incident in Florida, I made a presentation to this committee. We need to, as a safety committee, start hardening some of our vulnerable sites, such as Eddie West Field and Main Place Mall, and the big events that we have in the downtown area with cameras and metal detectors before something tragic happens in the city. Now, let's get on to the marijuana issue. I'm glad we're trying to wrap around the issue of money and getting control on this. The state finance officer estimates this to be a $7 billion industry once it gets going in the state of California. And before you lose total control, I see this going the way that it possibly being rolled into the ABC, where they take the zoning away from you, and it's zoned by the state of California, such as what has happened with tattoo parlors, adult entertainment facilities, and when it gets out of control. So I just think that we're moving in that direction. Casinos, and now the Supreme Court is taking up an issue this week, which will be a decision in the spring, which will eventually allow sports betting and booking throughout the country. So I just think this is a great idea that the revenue is coming in, but I think some of that revenue needs to be directed to certain areas to help the police department. I just want to give you one statistic here, that the number of green DUIs has increased by approximately 47% from 2007 to 2013, and that's the statistics from the National Health Institute. So there are some enforcement issues and problems that will come from this, but if we grab it in the beginning and we get a handle on this and we try to control it as much as possible before the state takes control away from us, I think we're better off.
Thank you. Next, we have Jack Haley. Wow. Okay. He's with Lee and Associates, and I know he has done some outreach with the industrial community. Next, we have Gil Salmon.
Hi, good evening, council members. I think you know I'm a resident of Santa Ana. I live in Ward 2. But one piece of this that I'm surprised to see in the presentation is that the draft ordinance actually allows us to qualify for grants. But the League of California Cities put out a primer, and one of the things was, can a city ban personal outdoor cultivation, commercial cultivation, and others? And it says yes, but that would specifically make it ineligible to receive state grant monies funded through the new excise tax, which I think you know is 15%. So, and I spoke about this right after the election at the wider city council meeting, which is that by continuing to keep personal outdoor cultivation illegal, we're making our city ineligible for state grants. And as you know, we do a great job getting, something like $40 million in grants for protected bike lanes from the ATP funds. We do not so great a job at getting other grant monies, but I would hate to make us ineligible for those grants even before we have a chance to apply for them. So I'm hoping that this can be edited to make sure that we allow outdoor personal cultivation, not because I want to grow in my backyard, but just because I think we need to have some opportunity to bring money into the city, especially when it's money for law enforcement, health, all of those. So. And then the other thing I want to talk about, just because this is in the purview of your committee, across the street from my house a couple weeks ago, a woman was found dead in her apartment. And then the street was closed off. Hazmat was out there. It turns out that the apartment was a drug lab. And this is across the street from our house. And this is something where the neighborhood's been asking for folks to do something about that apartment building for over a year. It got to the point where my neighbor stopped me on the street because she knew I was somehow involved with the city and begged for help. It got to the point where she moved because she was living in the apartment next door from this one. And so a 50-year-old woman died. We were able to catch, 2 folks, thanks to the law enforcement, but it shouldn't get to that before we're out there doing something about this. So, again, that was on the 200 block of Birch, across the street from my house. I have a 2-year-old and a 5-month-old, and it's just, if the community is out there asking for help, that's what you guys are talking about with the sanctuary city, is making sure that there's good communication between neighborhoods and law enforcement. If that doesn't even work, then what are we doing? So
Right. And that speaks to the need for more law enforcement. Thank you. Next, we have Chad Wank or Wanky, not sure how to... Okay. Welcome.
Thank you, council members and committee members. My name is Chad Vonka. I'm a land use and government affairs consultant, and I regularly help cities with their cannabis codes, primarily by providing a private sector perspective I've got several years of government experience and almost 30 years of land use experience. And the reason I'm here today is because I think there's one small amendment that should be made to the overall cannabis policy in the city of Santa Ana. Most of you have in front of you a single sheet with proposed language. The point of this amendment would be to allow permittees to change locations upon approval by the city and provided the new location meets the qualifications of the original approval. The reason for this is that buildings burn down, other uses come into neighborhoods, leases expire, ownerships change, and at some point, the people that you're permitting now who are providing a lot of tax revenue, some of them will need to change locations. That's just what happens in real life in businesses. And provided the city has the ability to approve these and control these, I think it's just good public policy and that it will save the city trouble in the future if you address this issue right now. It's a fairly easy fix. There's some language there. It was written by a municipal attorney. You don't necessarily have to have that language, but I think, again, this is just good public policy. It'll allow the city of Santa Ana to continue to work with good operators who will pay their taxes, be good community partners, and it'll allow you to also get the original 20 open. There are several people that have had issues opening up. This would allow them to open also. You can get your original 20 open and move on down the line to get these other permittees open and running and generating tax revenue. So I'd like you to please consider that. It's a simple amendment. I actually expanded it. The font was pretty small, so it takes up almost a full page, but if we use the standard font for municipal terminology, it wouldn't. So again, just ask you to consider that amendment language or some amendment language that would allow permittees to change locations upon approval by the city. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and we do appreciate you putting it in writing for us. Next, we have Chris Glue.
Yes. Good evening, city
Welcome.
staff. Hey, thank you, council member. I'm here tonight on behalf of the Santa Ana Collective Association, and unfortunately, in the allotted time, I don't have enough time to share all of our comments and concerns, but fortunately, I've had the opportunity to speak with most of the staff, not a lot of the policymakers yet. We have shared the majority of our concerns. We look forward to the opportunity to continue that conversation as we move forward. For the highlight reel for tonight, I kind of want to focus on three main things. The first thing is we need to talk about operational status, defining these entities as operational before January 1st, 2018. What do I mean by that? The state has to recognize that the city has given operational status to people that seek any license under the state law before January 1st, 2018. Or we have a bigger problem. The revenue chart that you have in your handout is going to read 0 all the way down for all of 2018. If they can't get operational and start that application process, there's a very good chance there'll be prohibited use until 2019. So, with that being said, what we're seeking is some type of language in the ordinance that defines the existing Measure BB clubs as operational before January 1st, 2018. Additionally, we'd like to see all license categories find some way, a pathway to licensure before January 1st, 2018. So for manufacturing, distribution, testing, all those categories, that's the way to get these places up and running. There are some obvious hurdles to that, especially figuring out who the people would be that would maintain that eligibility. So we came up with a few ideas. One would be that you allow all the pool of applicants for the manufacturing, distribution, all those categories, if they submit an application by January 1st, that they receive operational status. Allow them to apply for the temporary issued license under the state law, which is a 120-day temporary license. Additionally, they can apply for state licensing. However, they won't be able to run the business until they're in compliance with the local city laws. Therefore, you'd be able to allow all the people that apply to be eligible to be operational under the state laws in 2018. So your revenue charts would, in fact, be reflective of reality. The second thing I wanted to highlight is distribution. We've talked with the staff, and we've made it very clear that 5 licenses is very, very small. Here's the idea behind that. If you're thinking that these distribution facilities are all going to be major Southern wine and beverage, huge facilities with huge platforms, that's not, in fact, reality. A lot of distributors are very small. In fact, a lot of the people that have the manufacturing license could utilize a distribution license to distribute their own product. So you can see a lot of like micro businesses with a distribution license. there's additional revenue there with a very low impact on the community. The last thing I want to make sure I highlight is, in fact, the micro-business license category. Expansion of that, allowing for people that obtain a micro-business license or allowing them to even achieve that micro-business license would allow them to have a retail location with a small grow in the back. That way, a shop like a Measure BB shop could have a retail in the front, 5,000 square foot grow in the back. It's going to give you a lot more opportunity to scale this ordinance. It's going to give you a lot more opportunity to generate additional revenue from this ordinance. You could have essentially 20 new cultivation sites that are all 22,000 square feet, and you could still have additional grows under the micro business license. So, am I still good? All right,
I
thank you.
think your time, but you got your 3 points, and we know you submitted some written
Yeah, we
communications
submitted a
as
lot
well.
of written items, and we continue to do so as the process is ongoing. And I know this isn't our only opportunity to engage with the council, so we thank you for your time. We look forward to the expansion of the cannabis.
Thank you. Next, we have Rama Macias.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Rama Macias, resident of Santa Ana for over 40 years. And as much as I really appreciate these businesses, I don't think that is the business that I, as a resident, as a parent, approve of it. Why? Because this is affecting our kids. We have 60,000 students in our city, over 300,000 residents. And my question is, how many of these individuals applying for these drugs bringing to Santa Ana are residents or consumers or have families that really need these medications? They should be distributed through doctors, not being an option of individuals that prescribe marijuana for everything. They bring these businesses to the city without, they said that they came, I'm a board member of ComLink. They came and told us, if we don't do this, the state is going to take over this, and the state is this. Well, you know what? I don't see it that way. That is your responsibility to make sure that every resident knows what's involved. If you all, or some of you remember Steve McGuigan, he was a cancer patient. And he went to the council meeting, every meeting, and said, you know what, I don't believe in this. This is something that is not for me, that I'm dying, that I have to go through chemo, that I have to suffer the after effects, and he never approved. But the council ignored them because he had no money in his hands to share. Everything is about money. How about the health? How about education? Our community is horrible. We have neighborhoods that are invaded by the gangs, by the drugs, graffiti, everything. It's about money. When are you going to put your heads together for something more than money? If you are, bring something positive to the city. Neighborhoods that are horribly. The police has not enough manpower. Code enforcement doesn't have enough manpower to go to after the effects of what this is going to bring. It's not enough money. People don't come forward to say, you know what, my son is in gangs. My son got killed because he was induced to drugs. Right now it's marijuana. Next is going to be what? And you all are going to prove that? Are we talking about your kids? Are you talking about your family? Would you like to see your sons, if they are able to work? Is my time? If they are hired in a job, are they allowed to use drugs? Or they taste it before they are allowed to work? Please go back to your home and think about your families.
Thank you, Ms. Macias. Now we'll have some council questions. I'll start with a few. First, just to continue on what Councilmember Tinajero raised, which I agree with them. State law, as I understand it, says that if these businesses have 20 or more employees, then the businesses need to be subject to collective bargaining with their employees. So I believe that's what state law is. And it's my understanding that in Long Beach, which has done some work in this area, I think their language says if it's 3 or more. And I think the reality is really most of these businesses are going to have 3 or more, 20 or a good number more, in a way that it may not be too much of a burden on these businesses. And I think even in terms of the current salaries being paid, I think they generally seem to be living wages. So that is something I would like staff to consider, either at the minimum mirroring state law or the Long Beach language or somewhere in between. And then maybe, I know I had a similar conversation with staff about some type of social equity language that could be in the ordinance or maybe the application, where we give points in terms of things like local hire, and maybe that's where maybe it's social and economic equity, and we could speak to this labor piece as well. In term, a key point brought up that relates to a thought that I have, and that deals with. It sounds to me like it is important to define operational status. I think I looked in the draft resolution, and I don't think I saw a definition in there. But I would like to see that, assuming that there is, council action consistent with the timeline reference, that there might be some time this year to begin to receive applications, provide licensure permits, et cetera, because it would seem to me that, particularly for those facilities that are already open and operational, that if they are doing something that isn't too difficult from a structural or operational standpoint, I could see that they could be operational by the end of this year. And on that, let me pause before I get to a couple of other things. In terms of operational status, has our attorney or staff looked at the potential need to address that issue or question in our ordinance or elsewhere?
With regard to the applications that will be submitted, is that what you're asking? Yes, we have considered the timeline where the applications would be accepted by the city, as well as the same time the merit-based system, and the process in which we could provide a letter to those folks that they have operational status with the city that they could provide to the state. So we have discussed that internally.
Excellent, and something we could do in this calendar year. Well, where it makes sense. I mean, some are going to be farther along than others, but staff definitely needs to keep that in mind, so thank you for that. I have a question on the revenue sheet. I know it makes mention of half the revenues for enforcement. Is that in policy somewhere, or is that... I guess whose judgment call is that, or
that is just the recommendation that's coming from the staff. Half of the BB resources went to enforcement and administration, the auditing and the things that the finance department does regarding the revenues that come in. And as we venture into a new, should the council choose to, a new part of cannabis businesses, we thought we should look at that same range. At some point, one would assume the revenues would exceed what's really needed for 50%. Right. But we clearly know that we could have a terrible problem on January 1 if we get back to the situation we were with medical and so many illegal shops opening in all communities, but in Santa Ana over 120. And we thought at the 50%, if taking 50% of the revenues for enforcement would give us a good basis for making sure that that doesn't happen
I guess
again.
my question is just so that it's a policy that's in writing somewhere, where might it be? I mean, is it here, or is it in lieu tax agreement? Is it maybe with I know we're going to start doing mid-year budget reviews. Maybe it's there. So I don't know if we know yet where a good place is for that.
Probably would put it in the budget.
Okay, yeah, I think it should be in the budget. Yeah,
part of the guidelines for preparing the budget, that half of the dollars go for enforcement.
And with revenue that we've been receiving to date, how have we been spending the money? I don't know that I've seen.
We added
an
officer
updated
positions. We added code enforcement. We
So it's
added
half and half?
Yeah, equivalent of 1 FTE to the attorney's office, and
Okay.
so that's how that 1.7.
There's a total of 11 members that make up that enforcement team.
Got it.
Covered
So
through
that
Measure
helps.
BB.
Okay,
Correct.
so half does seem like we can.
Correct.
About 1.75
But I
billion.
agree with you that at some point there may not be the need for that much. And for example, over time, I'd like to see, let's say, a third of the money go to parks and recs or youth programs, and that would be consistent with Prop 64, where the revenue is going to law enforcement and after school programs in particular. So I think that would be good. A question regarding the micro businesses. I don't know that I think I see a definition in the ordinance about it, but I don't know how that relates to the number of licenses that we might do. Are we prepared to talk about that today?
We weren't recommending micro licenses. We were recommending that individuals that wanted to have multiple uses would come and apply individually. That is something that's available that we could look at, but that's not the way we had proposed the initial ordinance.
Okay, fair enough. And I do appreciate that in terms of the limits that staff did take into account our last public safety committee, where we thought there ought to be limits. I think by and large this looks like a reasonable starting, and then maybe in 2 or 3 years we could reassess if it's not enough or too many. But this is a good starting point. With distribution, I do think that I agree with some of the public commentary that for some it may be like a ancillary or secondary use, that if you're manufacturing or you're doing some other activities, that some things may fall under distribution as a definition. So I would not want that activity to be not allowable. So we probably ought to look at lifting that number up from 5, and maybe staff between now and our next meeting could figure out what that item is. On the issue of grants, I know that came up, and someone that tracks grants and policies statewide a lot. I'll tell you that right now the state may think they're going to do grants a certain way, but once they do regs, they may change it, and there'll be, I think, a variety of different grants at different levels. So I don't think that the direction that we're moving in really is going to prevent us from receiving most grants in the future. Those are the initial questions I have, but I think staff's off to a great start. Councilmember Tinajero?
Thank you, Councilman Solorio. I do want us to take a look at this page that was brought forth today, because we do have a slight issue here in that we have associations in some of these industrial zone areas where if they vote to not let you operate, you're pretty much done. And so those individuals who paid to be a part of the lottery system, who were able to get be able to apply, right now are kind of, there's a few that are just hoping that they can get some movement. So I would like us to take a look at this and see if we can incorporate that, so that they can see if they could find another location that fits within the parameters of Measure BB, where that they could open up and operate. So it's not just that site, so potentially another site. Also, I am in agreement with Councilmember Solorio. One of the questions I had here was, let's say, for example, we have, let's just pretend, I know this isn't the case, but let's pretend you have 20 collectives right now, and all 20 decide that they want to create indoor cultivation. Then you've pretty much shut the door for any other cultivation. And as gentleman came up and spoke, stated that some of these are small cultivations. One of the things is we're the only game in town. We're the only ones that have been forward-thinking. Our residents overwhelmingly supported Measure BB because they see the value in it. We went from 120 legal dispensaries that were near parks and near schools and so forth, down to what we're in the teens right now. So our police officers are doing a great job of shutting them down. I think that one of the things that we want to take a look at is the opportunity for us to have, manufacturing, not discourage manufacturing for other entities that come into play. I think that we should have our individuals who are already here and already licensed should have first priority in moving into manufacturing or moving into indoor cultivation. I believe that we should go ahead and put them at the top of the list since we already know who they are and they're already operating within our city. And that's kind of the reward for being a good operator in our city. And then at the same time, we should open it up for others that want to come in after the fact. And the reason for it is because once this goes legal, once it's ready to go legal, there's going to be a great demand for all of these services. So I agree with Councilman Solorio that we have to look at that distribution facility and really rethink that number as well. I heard one of our speakers came up to speak, and the fact is that this wasn't a Santa Ana issue. This is a statewide issue, and now that California has legalized it, it's going to get legalized across the United States. I mean, it's a given. And I was recently in Illinois, and I met with their Department of Economic Development, who I've met years ago, and we were talking, and he said to me that Illinois is a little bit more strict when it comes to their medical cannabis and how they operate, but that they're going to loosen it up as well. And so he was wondering if there was information that I could give him from our city on how we operated, because they need that information. And I said to him, I said, well, what do you see? He says, Sal, the polling is all over the map. So this is something that's moving forward. I think Santa Ana has always been smart, has always been forward thinking. So the speaker who came up to speak, who says that she's very much opposed to this, I think there is a way to kind of meet that need as well. It's not everything that she wants or everything that everyone's going to want to restrict it, because we're not going to go there. But I think there was something that was pretty effective with children, and that was the anti-smoking campaign. And I think that if we could allocate from all of our people that are working within this industry to all pitch in a certain amount to reach about $200,000, that it be used for the school district to do an anti-marijuana smoking campaign at the elementary grade levels. I think that wouldn't hurt. I think people would be supportive of that. And that's just another way to educate communities, no different than the Red Ribbon Week and what you do with anti-drinking and smoking tobacco products or chewing tobacco. It creates awareness for young kids. My son's a baseball player, and chewing tobacco is something that some coaches use, and kids see it and so forth. So I appreciate when we have the Red Ribbon Weeks during the school year that my son gets to learn about what could be harmful based upon that. So I don't want to make this a something that hurts the businesses. There's a way to do it where you could be responsible, where it's not going to hurt anyone's bottom line. That's just a thought where we can do that. But I think we need to move. Let me tell you where I don't want to be. I don't want to be here January 1st and we haven't issued anything, because then I think I'm going to start growing hair again. We need to move forward and get it done. All right. Thank you.
Good comments and questions, Councilmember Villegas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Ms. Macias, for coming up and speaking on this. I'm right with you on that. You know, everyone knows I'm not a big fan of the marijuana industry. California voters have, they voted. Santa Ana voters did their thing. 27 years in law enforcement, I've seen more kids with more marijuana problems than alcohol problems, hands down. But it is what it is. So my commitment to the public is to make sure that I can bring forth a good policy, good ordinance, and public safety. All right, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. I do have another question or two, but we did get one late request to speak, and since we're still pretty good on time, I will allow it. Melahat Rafael with the Santa Ana Cannabis Association.
Thank you so much. I want to thank staff and policymakers for taking the initiative and working so hard on something that is so complicated. You're pioneers here, and I want you to be recognized for that work. I know you all realize the timeline and what we're working with for the industry and for the city. A couple of things I just wanted to point it out. It's been brought up a couple of times. The moving of the locations, if you were one of the top 20 that were selected. The Santa Ana Cannabis Association opposes this because it does change the rules halfway through. The first 20 that were selected, part of that process was getting the sign-off of your landlord or your association or whatever it was. If you didn't get that, or if that changed afterwards, that meant there were people that are on the waiting list who had been paying rent for 3 years who were not able to progress and move forward. And those 20 could have been opened and operated if those who were blocking and were not able to open would have stepped aside and let those who were in the right zone, who had the buildings, who had the LOIs, to do so. So I want to put it officially on the record that we do not support that. Micro businesses, I know that it's been important for a lot of the policymakers to have economic equity in this industry, as it is to the association. We do realize that most of those who were affected by the implementation of drug policies are Black and brown men. We want to make sure that they have equal access and equity when it comes to this industry. Micro businesses are a really great way to make sure that happens. There's a lot of capital that is required to be in this industry. The micro businesses make it possible for those who don't have as much capital to get in and operate. So I'd like staff and policymakers to take that into consideration. And we are also incredibly aware of youth access to cannabis, illegal youth access, and the number one way to make sure that there's prevention of youth access is more after-school programs. We'll work with the city hand in hand to be part of that, but the more funding that can go to after-school programs, the more we can help prevent youth access to cannabis. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Just one thought on the moving thing, because we've heard the different perspectives on that. There may be another middle ground too, just where those that won a lottery spot but haven't been able to finalize the location, that they're just allowed to apply. For example, for adult use, since we're allowing up to 23. I know too, the other thing is the council recently, for similar considerations of others that are in the lottery waiting, that we shorten some of the processing time so we can keep working through the waiting list, and I think we want to work through the waiting list. But I agree with Councilmember Tina Harrow that some have been doing due diligence and maybe have invested some dollars and maybe something substantial change in terms of the thoughts of the homeowners association. So maybe they essentially don't have a guarantee, but that they be allowed to apply for one of the 23. And I know on the merit scoring or good standing scoring, whatever we might want to call it, the fact that they have been going through the process and working with staff, could be a consideration for some points there. So I think there's a way to value good operators or good individuals that had a lottery spot that just for whatever reason haven't been able to get that final security on homeowners association approval. Does staff have any other initial thoughts on this moving language? I know we just received it today, so you don't have to,
I think we probably need to spend some time and look at
yes.
it. And we have from tonight the information that get back to both the proposer and the association and try to find a balance in it.
As well as I think too, there probably is the situation where there were some on the waiting list that not on the waiting list, but some that were part of the initial 20 where maybe their time has lapsed, and so how would they be considered in terms of an opportunity to move or not? And I guess I would suggest that those individuals are the ones that are in that position right now, that they be allowed. They should be allowed to apply and have maybe some points given. But definitely, I do want staff to consider some way to address that suggestion. Any other questions or comments from my colleagues? Councilmember Tinajero, I know you've kind of been working in this area for much longer than the two of us. Given where we're at today with this draft ordinance and the comments, do you think it should be moved directly to the council, or would you like to have one more meeting where staff takes the input, puts it in written form for consideration? Because I do want to get it right rather than just forwarding it directly to the council if we feel that there's a need, because having a discussion like this is hard from the dais where there's 7 of us and long agendas and speakers. If you have any
No, I
thoughts?
agree. I believe we are thinking out loud. We have ideas, and then the industry also has their ideas, and so it's important for our staff to meet with people in the industry, and it's important for us to also walk through it. I think we should probably have another special meeting, and then before the October 17th meeting, just to make sure that we have ironed out any potential pitfalls. We don't want to go there. We want to have this one to be successful, just like the last implementation that we had.
Councilor Rodriguez, thoughts on
One
that?
more meeting.
Okay.
One more meeting.
Staff, is that reasonable, and we can do proper noticing and
Absolutely. We'll be
take
in
into
touch
account
tomorrow
these- yeah.
about your calendars and schedule it as soon as possible.
Very good.
But staff is used to working almost daily on this ordinance recently, right, Robert?
Yeah.
So I think that that's a wise decision that
Yeah.
we iron out things at the committee level where we can all talk about it and then take something that's got the support of the committee to move forward.
Very good. As well as I think down the road, there's going to be a lot of scrutiny on what we did, and I want everything we do in Santa Ana to be, a model ordinance, so we can be the poster child for, good, legislative bodies in this space. So I think that would be a good suggestion there. Are there any other? So we will then, as a recommendation, just bring this item back at a time to be scheduled and determined by staff in coordination with the committee members. And are there any other council member general comments or ideas for future agenda items? Councilmember Villegas?
No comments.
Thank you. Councilmember Tinajero? Seeing none, with that, we adjourn. Thank you, everybody. And we will continue to